The call came in at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning, which was exactly the kind of timing that made Harriet Bowen's left eye twitch. Not Harriet. She'd gone by Harry since she was 9 years old, when a substitute teacher had called her Harriet in front of the whole class, and a boy named Kyle had laughed so hard he'd fallen off his chair. The name stuck the wrong way. Harry stuck the right way. She was 31, worked for Dunbar and Associates Cleaning Services out of Mississauga, and had been dispatched to the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower on Bay Street, because the night crew had missed their shift and someone important was arriving at 8. That was all the information dispatch gave her. Someone important, arriving at 8. Harry didn't ask questions. She loaded the cart, took the service elevator, and got to work. The 42nd floor was not like the other floors she cleaned. Most corporate floors had a generic sameness to them. Grey carpet, motivational prints, a kitchen that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and broken dreams. The 42nd floor of Meridian Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lake Ontario, furniture that probably cost more than her car, and a boardroom table made of a single slab of walnut that Harry genuinely wanted to apologize to before wiping it down. She was working on the windows, the kind of focused, methodical work that let her mind run, when the elevator opened 40 minutes early. 4 men in suits walked out first, scanning the room the way people do when they expect trouble. Then a 5th man, tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his mid-40s, the kind of jaw that looked like it had been designed by a structural engineer, stepped out and started speaking into a phone in rapid French. Not Quebecois French, Parisian French. The kind that sounds slightly annoyed at everything by default. Harry kept wiping the window. The man's name, she would learn in the next 30 seconds, was Armand Delacroix. She knew the name because one of the suited men, younger, sweating despite the air conditioning, said it in the tone of someone who had been awake for 48 hours and was running out of ways to manage the situation. "Mr. Delacroix, the interpreter hasn't arrived yet. We've tried reaching the agency 3 times. Armand Delacroix lowered his phone. The temperature in the room dropped approximately 4 degrees. "The Kozlov delegation arrives in 20 minutes, he said, in English that carried the faint ghost of an accent. Mikhail Kozlov does not speak English. His lawyers do not speak English. His daughter, who does speak English, was apparently detained at Pearson this morning for documentation issue." He paused. "Tell me you have a solution, Etienne." Etienne, the sweating one, looked at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. Harry finished the window, moved to the next one, and said nothing. She was good at saying nothing. She'd had 31 years of practice. The Kozlov situation, Harry gathered over the next 15 minutes, was catastrophic in the specific airless way that only corporate catastrophes could be. Armand Delacroix was the lead negotiator for a resource consortium, mining, specifically, with operations stretching from northern Ontario to the Northwest Territories, that was 3 days away from closing a deal that had taken 18 months to structure. The deal required Mikhail Kozlov's signature. Kozlov was a Russian industrialist who had made his money in rare earth metals, and apparently made it a point of pride to conduct all business in Russian. Not because he couldn't speak other languages, but because he felt a man should be comfortable when he was about to write very large numbers on a contract. The interpreter, a woman named Sandra who had been specifically vetted, security cleared, and flown in from Ottawa, had come down with acute appendicitis at midnight and was currently in surgery at Mount Sinai. The agency's backup was stuck in traffic on the 401. The second backup didn't have Kozlov's security clearance. The third backup, Etienne looked like he might cry when he reported this, spoke Russian at a conversational level. Conversational, for a deal worth $900 million. "Find someone," Armand said very quietly, which Harry had already understood was more frightening than if he'd shouted. "Find anyone. There are 60,000 people in this building's postal code alone." Harry moved her cart to the boardroom entrance and began working on the glass panel beside the door. She could hear everything. She kept working. Etienne found her 10 minutes later, which was technically not finding her so much as spinning around in desperation and making eye contact with the only other person in the room. "You," he said, pointing at her. Then, with the uncomfortable awareness that he was pointing at someone doing manual labor, he lowered his arm. I'm sorry. Does your company have anyone who... I speak Russian, Harry said. Etienne blinked. Ukrainian and Polish also, she added. And German, if that's relevant. And French, though based on what I've heard this morning, Mr. Delacroix doesn't need help with that. The room went very still. Armand Delacroix turned around slowly. He had the look of a man who had learned through hard experience not to get his hopes up. But hope, Harry thought, was hard to suppress entirely when your only alternative was a disaster. He looked at her, the cleaning cart, the uniform, dark green, practical, with the Dunbar and Associates logo on the chest, her face which was round and calm and gave away nothing. Russian, he repeated. I did my master's degree in Slavic linguistics at the University of Toronto, Harry said, going back to the glass panel. Then the funding for my PhD dried up and I needed a job. Dunbar pays well and the hours work around my freelance translation work. Though I should mention, she added, turning briefly, that I'm currently on the clock, so if you need me to stop cleaning and start interpreting, someone will need to call my supervisor. Armand Delacroix stared at her for a long moment, then he took out his phone. Tell me your supervisor's name, he said. Her supervisor's name was Dale, and Dale had 3 things to say. First, that this was unusual. Second, that Harry's hourly rate would need to be discussed. And third, after Armand Delacroix said a number into the phone, that Harry should take as long as she needed and he would send someone else for the windows. Harry set down her cloth, took off her work gloves and said, Do you have a place where I can wash my hands? Tien pointed her toward a private washroom near the corner office. While she was washing her hands, she looked in the mirror. Her hair was up in its usual functional knot. She had product residue on her left sleeve. She was wearing sensible shoes. She looked, she thought, exactly like what she was, a person who had made an unlikely set of choices that had somehow, in this moment, intersected with a $900 million deal. Life was funny that way. She dried her hands and went back out. Mikhail Kozlov was shorter than Harry expected. She had built, from the description, a picture of someone enormous and intimidating. He was instead a compact man in his late 60s with white hair, a neat beard, and the eyes of someone who had been reading people professionally for decades. He came in with 2 lawyers, an assistant, and a security detail that Etienne's security detail regarded with the wariness of 2 unfamiliar dogs deciding whether to bark. He looked at Harry, directly, assessing. Then he said in Russian, You are not Sandra, no, Harry said, in Russian. Sandra is in surgery. I am Harry Bowen. I was cleaning the windows when this became a problem. A pause. Kozlov looked at Armand Delacroix. She was cleaning the windows, he repeated in Russian. Harry translated this for Armand. Armand's jaw did something complicated. Yes, he said, she was. Harry translated that too. Kozlov's expression, which had been granite, cracked very slightly at the edges. He turned back to Harry. You speak well, he said. No axe. My mother's family is from Kharkiv, Harry said. I grew up hearing it at dinner. Kozlov looked at her for another moment. Then he sat down. Tell Delacroix, he said, that I'd like coffee before we begin. Real coffee, not whatever this country calls coffee. Harry translated this with complete accuracy, including the editorial comment at the end. Armand looked at her. A very small smile moved across his mouth and disappeared. Tell Mr. Kozlov, he said, that I had beans flown in from Marseille this morning. Kozlov, when Harry translated this, made a sound that might have been approval. They got to work. For the first hour, it went smoothly. Harry sat between the 2 delegations at the walnut table, translating with the steady precision of someone who understood not just words but the weight behind them. The difference between Kozlov saying, "This is acceptable," and "This can be made acceptable," which in Russian carried entirely different implications about what would have to happen next. She caught 2 of those in the first 40 minutes. She flagged them quietly, turning to Armand and saying, in a low voice, he said can be made acceptable, not is acceptable. There's a condition attached. You'll want to ask what it is before you move to the next clause. Armand looked at her, then at Kozlov. Then he asked. The condition, related to a Northern Land Corridor access provision buried in Schedule D, would have taken 3 weeks to untangle if it had been discovered after signing. Finding it now took 40 minutes and cost a minor concession that both sides considered reasonable. Good catch, Armand said to her during a 5-minute break. It's in the verb conjugation, Harry said. Russian has a way of hiding conditions in tense. People miss it if they're translating too fast. Armand looked at her with an expression she recognized. It was the look people got when they realized they had significantly miscategorized someone and were in the process of updating their assumptions. She got that look a lot. She'd stopped finding it offensive. It was just information. The second hour was where things went sideways. One of Kozlov's lawyers, a thin man named Petrov who had been quiet until now, produced a secondary document and began speaking in rapid, dense legal Russian that had clearly been prepared in advance. Harry listened. Her expression didn't change. The document was a modification clause. It was also, unless Harry was misreading it, an attempt to insert a unilateral exit provision that would allow Kozlov's consortium to withdraw from the deal within the first 18 months without penalty, under a list of conditions broad enough to drive a cargo ship through. She translated it accurately, every word. Then she said to Armand quietly, "I'm not advising you. But as a translator, I want to flag that the phrase he used in Clause 7, which I've translated as market conditions, in the original Russian is a term that in legal context typically refers to conditions as defined by the party invoking the clause. Not a neutral standard, it's a one-sided definition." The room was very quiet. Petrov looked at Harry with an expression that was not friendly. Armand said nothing for a moment. Then he leaned over to his own lawyer, a woman named Claudette, and murmured something. Claudette read the translation Harry had provided, found the relevant clause, and her eyes sharpened. "We'll need to define that term," Claudette said. "Of course," Petrov said, in English, which was the first time he'd used English all morning. Kozlov, who had been watching Harry throughout this exchange, said something in Russian that his own lawyers clearly did not expect. He said, "She's right, fix the clause." Petrov went very still. Kozlov said, still in Russian, not looking at Petrov, "I didn't come to Toronto to be embarrassed by a technicality in 18 months. I came to close a deal that works, fix it." Harry translated this for the room. The silence that followed had a different quality to it. They broke for lunch at 12:30. The caterers had set up in the adjoining room, actual food, the kind that came in small, architectural portions that Harry appreciated aesthetically, but doubted would sustain anyone through the afternoon. She was standing near the window eating a very small square of something with salmon on it when Armand Delacroix came to stand beside her. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the lake. "Where did you study?" he asked. "U of T," Harry said. "Slavic linguistics. Masters, as I mentioned. Wrote my thesis on code switching in diaspora Russian communities in Ontario. And the German? My father's family is from Kitchener. My grandmother didn't speak English until she was 60. You learn, and Polish. My best friend in the program was Polish. We used to argue in each other's languages when we were stressed. It turned out to be useful." Armand looked at her. "Why cleaning services?" Harry considered this. It wasn't an insulting question, she decided. It was a genuine one. "When the PhD funding fell through, I applied to 17 translation agencies," she said. 12 didn't respond. 4 wanted someone with 5 years of industry experience, which you can only get if someone hires you, which they won't do unless you have 5 years of experience. 1 offered me a contract that paid $12 an hour, no benefits, available on call 24 hours a day. She picked up another small square of salmon. "Dunbar pays 22, benefits after 3 months, and I can set my own schedule around contract work. I've been building a client list for 2 years. I have 11 regular clients now. Today will probably be 12. Armand was quiet for a moment. "I would like to be client 12, he said. "Your company will need to go through my agency's rate card," Harry said. "I don't do informal arrangements." "Of course, and I'll need 24 hours notice for anything requiring specialized legal vocabulary in a sector I haven't worked in before. I'll study the night before, but I won't wing it, understood, and I won't work past 9 p.m. I have a cat." Armand looked at her. "A cat. His name is Borscht. He has anxiety. I'm not negotiating on this point." There was a pause. Then Armand made a sound that Harry realized after a moment was a laugh. A genuine one, short and surprised, like something that had escaped without permission. He covered it quickly, but it had been there. The afternoon session was smoother. With the clause fixed and Petrov's maneuver neutralized, The negotiation moved through the remaining documents with the steady momentum of a process that both sides had finally decided to complete honestly. Kozlov was, Harry found, a precise man. He said exactly what he meant in Russian, which was refreshing. He asked 3 questions that his lawyers clearly hadn't anticipated, and that got to the structural core of the deal more directly than anything else that had been discussed all day. At one point, during a technical discussion about land use classifications in the NWT corridor, he paused and said to Harry in Russian, "What do you think?" Harry blinked. "I'm the interpreter," she said. "I know what you are," Kozlov said. "I'm asking what you think." She looked at the relevant map section that had been laid on the table. She looked at the language of the access provision. She thought about what she knew about Northern Corridor negotiations from an article she'd translated for a mining industry newsletter 6 months ago. "The northern boundary on the Eastern Corridor," she said carefully. "It's drawn to the old survey line from 1987. There was a federal reclassification in 2019. If this contract references the old line, the access provision may not cover the area you actually need. You should check that before you sign." Both legal teams went very quiet. Claudette pulled up something on her laptop, checked it again. "She's correct," Claudette said. "The 1987 survey line, the 2019 reclassification moved the boundary 42 kilometers east. We need to amend the geographic description." It took another hour to fix. At 4:47 p.m. Mikhail Kozlov signed the amended agreement. Armand Delacroix signed across from him. Hands were shaken. There was briefly a bottle of very good champagne. Kozlov, before he left, stopped in front of Harry. "Unusual woman," he said in Russian. "I've been told," Harry said, "you would have made a good lawyer." "I didn't want to be a lawyer," Harry said. "I wanted to study language. I still do." Kozlov considered this. "What are you studying now?" "Mongolian," Harry said. "It's slower going. The vowel harmony system is complicated." Kozlov was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. "Plain, heavy stock, nothing on it but a name and a number. My consortium has offices in Ulaanbaatar," he said. "When your Mongolian is ready, call that number." He left. Harry looked at the card for a moment. Then she tucked it carefully into her pocket. The building was quiet by the time Harry went back for her cart. The caterers had cleared everything. The walnut table gleamed. The lake outside had gone grey-blue in the late afternoon light. She was checking her cart inventory. Cloth count, product levels, the small procedural satisfaction of a job properly completed, when she heard footsteps. Armand Delacroix had taken off his suit jacket. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. "From the machine in the kitchen," he said. "Not the Marseille beans. I apologize in advance." He held one out. Harry took it. They stood at the window for a moment looking at the lake. "You caught 3 things today that could have cost us the deal," Armand said. "The conditional tense in the first session, Petrov's clause. The survey line." 4, Harry said. "There was also a translation ambiguity in section 12, paragraph 3, where the word for priority in Russian has a specific hierarchical meaning that the English version flattened. I flagged it in my written notes, which I'll send to Claudette tonight. It won't be a problem for this contract, but if you're drafting future agreements with Kozlov's team, you should be aware of it." Armand looked at her. 4, he said. 4. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a plane was making its slow descent toward Pearson, leaving a thin white line across the grey sky. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For what? When you first spoke." "My first thought was," he stopped. Chose the words carefully, which Harry respected. "I assumed your offer was well-intentioned but probably insufficient. I assumed that because of," he gestured slightly, in a way that indicated the cart, the uniform, the whole external picture of her. "I know what you assumed," Harry said, without heat. "It was wrong." "Yes, I'm telling you because I want you to know that I know it was wrong. Not to make myself feel better about it." Harry looked at him. He was, she thought, more honest than most people in rooms like this. That was worth something. "I cleaned the 41st floor windows after you were done," she said. "I had a spare 20 minutes. I didn't want to leave it half done." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Something real, not the careful corporate neutrality he'd been wearing all day. "Your cat," he said. "Borscht. Yes, is he doing better with the anxiety?" Harry considered this. He's improved since I switched his food, and I got him a window perch so he can watch the birds. Structure helps. Structure helps, Armand repeated, like someone filing that away. They stood in silence for a moment longer. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was the kind of quiet that had room in it. My assistant will contact Dale at Dunbar tomorrow, Armand said. We'll establish a proper contract. The rate card, as you specified, good, and the 24-hour notice provision, yes, and the 9 o'clock limit. Non-negotiable, Harry said. Understood. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd set it down. He had, she noticed, the particular quality of stillness that very competent people sometimes had, the sense that he was always thinking one layer deeper than whatever he was saying out loud. She had that quality too. She wondered if he'd noticed. He paused at the elevator. Harry, he said. She looked up from her cart inventory. Thank you. She nodded once, the way she'd learned to accept things that were offered sincerely. Tell your assistant to mention the Mongolian, she said, in the contract notes, for future reference. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she'd have to think about later, on the subway home, with borscht on her lap and the day settling into something she hadn't entirely expected. Mongolian, he said. Noted. The doors closed. Harry finished her inventory, loaded her cart, and took the service elevator down. By the time she reached the lobby, she was already thinking about verb cases.